An older CEO was abandoned on a date, then a single dad asked one question. The waiter refilled her glass for the third time, and still the chair across from her stayed empty. Evelyn Radcliffe sat alone at a window table 60 floors above the city in a black dress she had chosen with more care than she'd admit to anyone, while the man who invited her to dinner had simply stopped answering his phone 40 minutes ago. She was 54 years old. She ran a company with 100 employees. She had negotiated million-dollar contracts without her voice ever shaking. And yet in this moment, under the golden restaurant lights, she felt smaller than she had felt in 20 years. If you believe kindness can still find us in our most humiliating moments, hit like, drop a comment, share this with someone who needs it, and subscribe to Kindness Corner too, because what happens next might just restore your faith in people. Evelyn had built Radcliffe Logistics from a single leased truck into a company that moved freight across 4 states. She'd done it after her divorce, after the lawyers took what they could and left her with a business plan and a stubborn refusal to fail twice in one lifetime. She was proud of what she'd built, but pride doesn't keep you warm on a Tuesday night when your son is grown and gone, when your friends are all paired off. And when a dating app matched you with a man named Warren who seemed over 3 weeks of texting kind enough, funny enough, real enough to give a chance to. He wasn't real at all. Somewhere between the appetizer and the second glass of wine, Evelyn had begun to understand that. His replies had gotten shorter. Then they stopped. She kept checking her phone with the practiced calm of a woman who had chaired 100 board meetings, refusing to let her face show what her chest already knew. The restaurant swirled around her. A table of laughing colleagues to her left, a young couple leaning into each other by the window, a waiter gliding past with a tray of champagne for someone's anniversary. Everyone in the room seemed to belong to someone. Evelyn belonged to an empty chair and a cooling plate of food she no longer had any appetite for. She thought about leaving. She thought about it for nearly 10 minutes, running the math the way she ran every difficult decision. Was it worse to sit here a while longer or to stand up and let the whole restaurant watch a woman leave alone in her best dress? In the end, dignity kept her seated a moment too long, and that single moment changed everything. And maybe that is worth sitting with for a second. We spend so much energy trying not to be seen in the moments we consider unflattering, when the truth is that nobody in that room was keeping score. There is no shame in being the person who showed up, who dressed carefully, who hoped out loud. The shame, if it belongs anywhere, belongs to the chair that stayed empty. That was when Elijah Carter walked past her table carrying his daughter fast asleep against his shoulder. He was 38, a black man, a widower, a single father of a 7-year-old named Amara, and he had brought her to this restaurant only because it was her birthday, and he had promised her 6 months ago, before her mother's condition worsened before the funeral, before his whole life folded in on itself, that when she turned 7, they'd eat somewhere with a view of the whole city. He had kept that promise, even though it nearly broke him to walk in the door alone with a little girl in a paper crown, even though every part of him wanted to cancel and stay home under a blanket instead. He kept it because some promises are the last threads holding a person together, and Elijah Carter was a man who did not let go of threads. He noticed Evelyn the way you notice someone trying very hard not to be noticed. Her hands were folded too neatly. Her spine was too straight. Her eyes kept drifting to the door and then away from it fast, like she was embarrassed to have looked at all. He almost walked past. He told himself it wasn't his business. He had enough sorrow of his own to carry without picking up a stranger's. But Amara, stirred against his shoulder, murmured something about the lights, and in that small motion, Elijah found himself slowing down beside Evelyn's table instead of walking on. He didn't say, "Are you okay?" He didn't say, "Were you stood up?" He asked one simple question, quiet enough that only she could hear it. "Would it be all right if my daughter and I kept you company for a few minutes? She's convinced tonight is magic, and I think she might be right." It is worth noticing exactly what he did there because it was smaller and smarter than heroism. "Are you okay?" would have named the wound and forced her to either lie or confess in a room full of strangers. What he offered instead was a role, not a woman being rescued, but a woman doing a tired father a favor. He asked for something rather than offering something, and in doing so, he let her keep every inch of her dignity. That is the difference between pity which looks down and kindness, which stands level with you. Evelyn looked up at him, at the tired kindness in his face, at the sleeping child in the paper crown, at a stranger who had somehow noticed her pain without naming it and offered her an exit that cost her nothing. For a moment, she couldn't answer. She had spent her whole adult life being the one who rescued other people's employees, her son herself, and she had forgotten what it felt like to be handed a small mercy by someone who expected nothing in return. She said yes. Elijah sat Amara gently into the chair across from Evelyn, and the little girl woke just enough to blink at the stranger and ask in the unfiltered way of children whether Evelyn was a princess, because her dress was black like the night sky, and she had sparkly earrings like stars. Evelyn laughed a real laugh, the first one in weeks, and told Amara that she supposed she was a very tired princess who'd had a long day at her castle, which was really just a big office building downtown. Amara found this endlessly funny. Elijah found himself smiling for the first time since the funeral, watching his daughter chatter with a woman she'd known for 90 seconds like they were old friends. They ended up sharing the table. Elijah apologized, half joking, that he hoped he wasn't intruding on someone's plans, and Evelyn, surprising herself, told him the truth. She told him she'd been waiting for a date who wasn't coming, that she felt foolish sitting there in her nice dress with a full glass of wine and an empty chair that she'd almost left before he walked by. Elijah didn't offer pity, which she was grateful for. He simply said that the man was a fool, said it plainly, the way you'd state a fact about the weather. And then he changed the subject to ask what kind of work let a woman command a restaurant table with such quiet authority, even when she was alone. She told him about the trucking company. He told her about being a contractor, about losing his wife to cancer 8 months earlier, about learning to braid his daughter's hair from shaky online videos at midnight because there was no one left to ask. He said it without asking for sympathy, the way people do when grief has become simply a fact of their days, rather than a fresh wound they're still bleeding from. Evelyn found herself listening in a way she hadn't listened to anyone in years, not performing patience, not waiting for her turn to speak, just listening. Because something in this strange man's honesty had cracked open a door in her she'd kept locked since her divorce. Amara fell back asleep against a folded napkin somewhere around dessert, and Elijah and Evelyn kept talking long after the plates were cleared, long after the couple by the window had paid their bill, and left long after the restaurant had begun to empty into the cold, bright night beyond the glass. They talked about the specific loneliness of success, how you can fill your calendar with meetings and still come home to silence, how people assume that a corner office means you've got life figured out, when really you just figured out how to hide the parts that aren't. Elijah talked about the terror of raising a daughter alone, of being both mother and father of some mornings, not knowing how he'd get out of bed and doing it anyway because a small girl needed her hair braided and her lunch packed, and someone to believe every single day that things would be okay. Evelyn realized somewhere around midnight that she had stopped checking her phone. She realized she hadn't thought about Warren in over an hour. She realized that the ache in her chest from being abandoned had quietly transformed into something else entirely, a fullness, a warmth, the strange grace of being seen by someone who had absolutely nothing to gain from seeing her. Here is what I keep coming back to whenever I tell this story. 2 people were sitting in that restaurant carrying almost identical weight, and neither one could see it on the other. She looked to him like a woman who had everything. He looked to her like a father having an ordinary night out with his child. We are all doing this to each other all the time, mistaking someone's composure for their contentment. Maybe the kindest assumption we can make about the people around us is that everyone is carrying something we cannot see and then behaving accordingly. Before they left, Elijah asked for her number, not smoothly, not like a man running a line, but like someone a little out of practice and a little afraid of being turned down. Evelyn gave it to him without hesitation, something she would not have believed herself capable of 3 hours earlier. As they walked toward the elevator together, Amara woke just long enough to reach for Evelyn's hand, and Evelyn, who had spent years being the strongest person in every room she entered, felt her eyes fill with tears she didn't bother hiding anymore. In the weeks that followed, what began as an accidental kindness became something neither of them had expected. Elijah called not with grand gestures, but with small, steady ones. A check-in after a hard day, a photo of Amara's newest drawing, a simple thinking of you. Evelyn found herself rearranging her schedule around coffee before board meetings, something the old version of her would have called reckless, and the new version of her called the first wise decision she'd made in years. She met Amara again, this time properly, at a park on a Saturday and spent 2 hours being taught the correct way to push a swing by a 7-year-old who took the responsibility very seriously. It wasn't a fairy tale arriving all at once. There were hard days, too. Elijah's grief still ambushed him without warning. Some nights he called Evelyn just to sit in silence on the phone because he couldn't find words for the missing. Evelyn had her own walls built brick by brick over a marriage that ended in betrayal, and she didn't lower them easily or all at once. But Elijah never asked her to. He simply kept showing up, kept asking questions instead of making demands, kept choosing patience over pressure, and slowly, the way trust always builds, not in leaps, but in small repeated proofs, Evelyn let him in. If there is anything to borrow from these two, it is that nobody is owed the inside of another person's heart on a schedule. The people who eventually get there are almost never the ones who pushed hardest. They are the ones who kept turning up gently week after week until turning up became something you could lean on. 6 months after that night in the restaurant, Evelyn stood in her kitchen watching Elijah help Amara frost cupcakes for a school project, flour dusted across his forearms, Amara narrating the entire process with the seriousness of a surgeon. Evelyn realized she was smiling without meaning, to the way you smile when your whole chest feels warm, and you can't quite remember the last time it felt this way. She thought about that night at the restaurant, about how close she'd come to leaving before Elijah ever walked past, about how one small act of unasked-for kindness had rerouted the entire rest of her life. She thought about how the worst moment of her evening, being abandoned, humiliated, sitting alone under those golden lights, had actually been the moment everything good began. She understood something then that she tried later to put into words for anyone who would listen, that the people who show up for you aren't always the ones you expected, and the nights that break your heart aren't always the ones that end it. Sometimes the person who rescues you isn't chasing anything from you at all. Sometimes he's just a tired father carrying his sleeping daughter past your table, noticing your pain without naming it, and choosing in a world that so often teaches us to look away to stop and ask one simple, generous question instead. And notice how little it actually cost him. A few minutes. One sentence. He was exhausted. He was grieving. He had every excuse in the world to keep walking, and he stopped anyway. Most of us will never be in a position to change someone's life dramatically. Almost all of us are in a position several times a week to slow down beside a person who is trying not to be noticed and to say something warm. That is not a small thing. That is usually the whole thing. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you that kindness still finds its way to the people who need it, most please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment about the part that moved you, share it with someone who might need this story tonight, and subscribe to Kindness Corner too, so you never miss the next one. Before we go, we have one small request. If you have ever been the stranger who received an unexpected kindness, or the one who offered it, we would love for you to type the word kindness in the comments below so we can see just how many hearts this story has touched tonight. Evelyn Radcliffe never did find out what happened to the man who left her waiting that night, and in time she stopped wondering. She had, after all, found something far better than an apology. She had found a family she never knew she was missing, built not from grand romantic gestures, but from one quiet question asked by a stranger who simply chose to care. And perhaps that is the truest kind of love story. There is not the one that begins with fireworks, but the one that begins with someone noticing you when the whole rest of the world had simply walked by.